Hey, what is going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and I want to start this off by saying that I'm not going to be doing too much here visually with this video. I'll probably do some edits and cuts here and there, but for the most part, I more just want this to be, well, kind of just sharing my experiences and almost just talking to you directly in regards to this in a more casual style video. Just talking about my about 2 months experience so far with the Steam Deck. So if you want to watch this, awesome, but if you want to just, kind of minimize this, put off to the side and listen to it, that works out as well too. Either way, yes, it has been a long road getting to this point, but right here I do have the Steam Deck from Valve, and I wanted to share why I got this, what my experiences have been so far, and kind of what my recommendations might be in regards to this here. I do want to say that I believe this also depends on what type of user you're going to be, as well as your background and all of that. So I will say, kind of just to paint a picture for myself, I myself mostly play on console. I have a console back there, an original Xbox that is running in the background. If you check out my channel, I have a big focus on video game console modding, unlocking them, and really tinkering with them so you can maximize the potential that you can get from old and new consoles. I do have a gaming capable PC. My desktop that I built several years ago, and I've had a few at this point, but my most recent one, I'm still on it. It's got a i7 6700K and a GTX 1080 Ti. It served me just fine, especially since I'm really not gaming on this computer all that much. I mostly just, the most intense stuff I do on it is video editing when it comes to things like this, which can be a bit intense. However, if I do want to play a game on here, I have yet to run into a game that really struggles to run on this system. Of course, I can't play the latest and greatest at 4K and completely maximize everything, but I'm also fine with that as well, too. I really don't mind turning down my graphics settings, but to me, it's also just a point where I don't play on PC all too often. And I've come to that, to terms with it. So I more prefer console. That is just my own personal preference on there. So that is why I was also kind of interested in getting a Steam Deck here, because at first people kind of just say this is a consoleized PC experience. And I'll start off by saying, at least in my opinion here, I don't think the console market or even the handheld market, like mainly the Switch at this point, really has anything to be all too worried about with direct competition to this. The reason why I say this is, as someone who is at heart a console gamer by preference, I haven't felt the need to throw away my Switch. I really haven't felt the need to gravitate a ton off it, and I play on my Switch quite a bit. And yes, I know you can emulate Switch games on here, but I still just, if I want to play a Switch game, I'll play it on my Switch. I really don't mind doing that. Now, the competitors for the Steam Deck, I will say, is going to be any other handheld PC in the handheld PC market. And I don't know the exact names, but I know like the Win, I think the GPD Win, the Aya Neo, there's a few other makers that do that same thing. Any of those companies who do make handheld PCs, and that's what I'm calling these. I'm calling these handheld PCs. They're the ones who should be shaking and afraid of the Steam Deck right here. This is what's going to be the big disruptor. Mainly because for what you're getting from a $400 device, 400 US dollars, it's absolutely astounding. I've been impressed at the hardware packed in here. Now, I will say, for any eagle-eyed viewers on here, you might have noticed this, but I do not have the 64GB version. I end up getting the biggest one, which was the 512GB version, mostly because from what I've seen, yes, you can upgrade the storage on here. I even love Valve's sentiment on that, where they pretty much said, hey, here's how you can tear down the Steam Deck, here's how you can replace the SSD. We really don't recommend you do this, but if you want to do it, here's the instructions. And I love that. I truly love it. And it doesn't seem all too difficult to do if you're comfortable taking this apart, but I end up getting the 512GB version because for me it was mostly, I don't mind, I want to maximize my storage on here, at least from the manufacturer spec, and I kind of just want to hit the ground running. I don't really want to do all the upgrades or anything. But that's also to say I do have a 512GB micro SD card in here, but I don't actually use that for my games. I'm actually dual booting on this thing. I'm running, of course, SteamOS that you can see on here, but off of the micro SD card, I am running Windows. Because this is another thing here. I've kind of been using this as a replacement laptop. You see, another thing with me is I'll actually show you all my newest laptop, which if you've been watching the channel for several years, this might seem familiar here. Hold on. Here's my laptop. It still serves me pretty well. And what exactly was this? Was this a Lenovo Y5070? There we go. I ended up getting this in 2014. I wanted something that would have an actual mobile, mind you, but actual GPU installed in there because I was wanting something that was going to be like a portable version of my desktop in a way. Not going to be as powerful, but if I want to play stuff on the go, if I wanted to edit videos and do all that, I could do this here. And it served me well for the most part. I'm not going to bore you all with these specifics here, but it's really been showing its age. However, it kind of got to a point for me, really especially after college, I stopped needing a laptop as much. I wasn't traveling as much. I wasn't needing a PC outside the house, and whenever I did need a PC at home, I would just gravitate over to my desktop. So I would go months and months without using my laptop. Then when it started showing issues, I said, you know what? Next year I'll upgrade. Next year I'll upgrade. Next year I will, or next trip I'll do it. And I just never really got to that point. So I've been putting off getting a new laptop for several years now, maybe 3 or 4 years at this point, just because it kind of got to the point, it's like, well, this laptop is showing its age. I do want a new laptop, but it's not a need. And how often am I really going to be using it? Probably not often enough to even justify, getting a $600 laptop. Because I'd really be feeling some sort of way where it's like, I just spent $600 on a new laptop and I use it like this many times a year? That's how I would feel. So I kind of had this moment where I realized, wait, you can run different operating systems on here because the beauty of the Steam Deck is this is a computer. This is not a locked-down proprietary game console or device that you have to modify and hack up in a certain way to run other operating systems on here. No. This is a computer that does have really nice official support and of course support from the community as well too to further tweak it, support it, and get everything up and running real nice. So when I realized that and I saw that there was even support for Windows drivers on here, I said, I don't need a laptop all that often, and even if I do need a bigger screen, I could just hook this thing up to HDMI. Why not just get a Steam Deck and dual boot it on here? So that's what I've been doing. On the internal SSD, I am using SteamOS on there. That has not changed. But on the micro SD card, I do have Windows 11 installed on there, and I put pretty much everything on my laptop on here. It's not a joke either. Like, to me, I do get a kick out of it where it's like, yeah, I'm literally running the Adobe Suite and Office and several other big applications off my Steam Deck. Do they run super great? I mean, they run okay for what they are. Part of it is, of course, the limitation of running off a micro SD card. It has a Windows to Go install on there. And also, it's not the best environment for it. But it works for me. It works for what I need it for and how often I need it for. And if I do need a bigger screen, I'm able to just dock this and use HDMI out on my dock through, USB-C on here. Or if I want to just do something really minimal here with the small screen, I'm aware the screen is small and the resolution is low on here. But if I need to do something quick and small, I don't really mind that either. I did end up purchasing a keyboard and a mouse. I'll actually even show them to you all real quick because I've really liked them. I just got like a little basic Bluetooth Microsoft mouse right here for about 15 bucks. And then I got a keyboard as well, which this obviously doesn't have the keypad on the side. But I also got a little bit of a kick out of this as well too, if I can show you all. The keyboard is like about as big as the Steam Deck, or the Steam Deck is about as big as the keyboard. And honestly, this has worked well enough for me. If I was constantly, I guess I can say if I was needing a laptop, I would buy a full-fledged laptop. But because at this point I don't really need one and I kind of just want one occasionally, dual booting Windows on here and then just having Bluetooth accessories works perfectly fine for my needs. I did also mention a dock, and I did end up buying one of these docks here when I got my pre-order notification. It's the JS Aux one, which it's funny because it seemed like this was already kind of a go-to one, and then I know several big review sites ended up posting up their reviews of it, so good luck finding one at this point. The reason why I end up settling on this one is because the downsides are the USB ports are only USB 2.0, but you plug in your power here, obviously. You plug this into the actual top of the Steam Deck, and it has HDMI out, which I've been able to hook this up to TVs with no issues in that regard. But this also has a bit of a rarity that I haven't seen on too many of these small docks. It does have Ethernet out. So if I need or want Ethernet, I do have it available. That's why I end up picking this here. And it's worked out well enough for me. Plus, I can literally just kind of dock it in like that, and it looks real nice. Now, I have talked about this in passing a few times, but I also want to say with actually picking up the Steam Deck here, the way you can order one, awesome. I have no issues with that. You're talking to someone who does own the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, but I struggled to find those systems. I really struggled to find those two systems just because, well, everybody knows how difficult it is or was to pick up one of those consoles. I love what Valve has done with the Steam Deck, where it's you pick whichever model you want, you pay $5 down for your pre-order, it's first come, first serve, and then once it is your turn, you end up getting an email asking you to pay the rest of the cost of it. And you have 3 days to pay for it. That's how it should be. That is how it should be. I pre-ordered my Steam Deck here maybe 2 or 3 days after pre-orders initially went live, because I wasn't planning on getting this thing originally. But then I said, I bought into the hype a little bit, and I also said, let me go ahead and get it, because I'm sure I'm going to enjoy using it. And if I decide not to get it, I can always cancel my pre-order. Or if I end up buying it and I decide I really don't like it, worst case, I could sell it off. But as my pre-order kept just staying there and I was waiting longer for it, I kind of kept thinking of more things that I could do with it and more purposes, such as, like I said, originally I was going to get a Steam Deck and eventually, maybe down the road, get a different laptop. And I said, wait, I could just dual boot on here. This is great. So I'm already going to save half of what I would have spent on 2 devices, because I'll just get one device and it'll do what I need it to, which isn't all too much on Windows, thankfully. But either way, I love that pre-order setup, and I think that is what companies should be doing with their products that are in heavy demand like that. I don't see an issue with that. I really don't see an issue with that. And as long as you have some patience and you wait, that is totally fine. So it's not a thing of I'm constantly trying and refreshing and trying different vendors to get this, and I'm constantly disappointed. Nope. Whenever I get to the page and I pick my model, I put $5 down, and I waited until it's my turn. And that's it. Like, good job, Valve. That's great. When it comes to actually using this, I will say my impressions of this so far, as you can see, I'm running it naked on here. I don't have any screen protector on here, which kind of surprised me. I decided not to get one, but that's also because the 512GB model has a anti-glare screen on here. So a lot of people have actually said, well, if you put a screen protector on, you're kind of defeating the purpose of that. And honestly, it's been fine. It's not like this has really suffered from a bunch of scratches or anything. I take good enough care of it, so it's been okay in that regard. But I don't have any other accessories attached to it. I don't have any skins on this, nothing. I just use it like this. And I will say, my first impressions of it, when I got this, when I started using it, big. That was my first impression of it. Like, I was surprised over how big this thing was. Let me see. I do have a Switch OLED right here. I can kind of briefly compare it, but, I got Switch here, Steam Deck here, that, yeah, like, it's a lot thicker as well, too, so there we go. But it ends up working. It ends up working really well. The ergonomics on this are pretty nice. I really haven't had any issues with anything here. The only thing would be the D-pad. The D-pad, it works well for just like picking and selecting a few things, but if you're going to be extensively using the D-pad, this thing hurts. That's just from my experience. This thing does hurt to use if you're going to be playing a game for really a good amount of time on this. So that's really the only issue that I've run into, but it seems like everything else has worked pretty fine for me in regards to ergonomics, and really they did their research on this. So again, awesome. Good job, Valve. Seriously. The second impression I had when I got this was fast. Good God, you turn this thing on, you boot up into SteamOS, you're able to connect just fine, and I have a gigabit connection here at home. Of course, I'm not going to get real gigabit just because, even if you're on wired, you're not going to get, 1,000 up, 1,000 down. I can realistically max it out at like 850, 900 megabits, which is more than fine for me, and then if you're on wireless, you're going to be getting less on there. But I just realized how fast this was when I was downloading and installing games, and it was just lightning quick. Granted, this is a quick game, but just an example, at one point when I just busted out laughing, I ended up downloading the game Fez on here. And at the time when I was like browsing my games and downloading this, I was having conversation with my girlfriend. And I laughed because she started a sentence, and before she could finish her sentence, I had hit download on Fez, it had downloaded the entire game and installed it on there. And it's just, I was absolutely mind blown at that, at just how fast this is overall. Of course, that is going to differ between connections and such on here, but if you have a fast connection, this thing works pretty well. Now, when it comes to in-game performance as well, too, I've been playing some PC games on here, and I do have a pretty robust Steam library, but it is also outdated because I really haven't played too many games on PC here for the past few years. So there's been, one or two games here and there that I've picked up. Now, I did play Stray, for example, on here, the game with the cat. I absolutely love that game. But I was playing it, and my frame of reference was I was comparing it to the PS5 version. Now, I have noticed when I am, maxing out the settings on Stray and even the resolution on there, it doesn't seem to hit a full 60 frames per second, and that seems to be a struggle of, many games on here. So I've even seen people recommending, setting up variable refresh rate on the display itself, or even adjusting games to run at 40 frames per second, so that way you still have a stable experience, and it's something between 30 and 40 frames. So just things like that. But typically I still try to get up to that 60 frames per second. So Stray wasn't completely consistent on there. I was also having some stuttering on the game as well too, but it wasn't enough to be game breaking for me. And part of that can be the specifications of the Steam Deck, but I also feel like a part of it is also Proton. Because for anyone who doesn't know, SteamOS is really Linux at the heart of it. Now, when you're playing a lot of games, there are there's games that are natively running on Linux, but many games that are compatible on here, and the compatibility list is always growing. Many games are using Proton. Stray is one of those games where when you download the game through here, like officially through Steam, you're downloading the Windows build of it. That build is not going to work natively on Steam, but when you're able to run it through Proton, it's able to work on SteamOS and on Linux. And it seems to work pretty well. There's going to be some games that work better than other games, just like any type of PC setup. Now, older games I've had better success with. For example, Condemned Criminal Origins, my goodness, I've been playing it on here, rediscovered my love for the game on that. It plays beautifully. It plays beautifully. Locked 60 frames per second. There is an awesome community as well too that was able to craft a really nice custom controller configuration, so you're able to make use of the back buttons on here while playing that. It's great. That's been another thing with the community on here. I love that you can look up an issue, and as long as you're adequately putting in the proper search terms on Google, there's going to be a strong Steam Deck community that will be able to answer those questions. One issue that I had was the game Prototype. I was trying it out on here, and I noticed that the game kept randomly crashing, completely randomly, and it was kind of soft crashing. It was just soft locking. There we go. The game would still be running, but the screen would just freeze, and I couldn't do anything. So it kept happening enough where I even re-downloaded the game. That didn't help, and it was just so random. So I looked this up, and I found out that this was an issue that was documented. And the fix for this ended up being that you can install something called Proton GE, which is just another variant of Proton. From what I've seen, due to, I guess, legal reasons on there, SteamOS can ship with Proton, but it cannot ship with Proton GE. But of course, you can go and download Proton GE. And when I say legal issues, it's not even a thing of like, oh, it can't ship with this, copyrighted code. It just seems to be the licensing on there probably won't allow for it, won't work for that. However, you as the end user can download, set up Proton GE. I haven't experienced this myself. I have seen people recommend using Proton GE for a better experience in their games overall, but for my experience, at least with this specific game, Prototype, I did notice essentially I had to download a specific version of Proton GE and then set up Prototype to run on that version of Proton. So really the, I guess, quick TLDR of that was downloading a program. You have to go into desktop mode for this, which is, as explained, it's really just booting into an actual desktop environment on the Steam Deck here. It's still Linux, it's still SteamOS, but it's booting into a desktop environment. You have to go there, you have to download the Flatpak for, I believe it's Proton Up QT, and from there, you can then download specific builds of Proton or Proton GE, or even experimental builds. So I had to download Proton GE 6.5. Once it was downloaded, I had to set Prototype to run under that. I think I might have had to do one more reinstall just because it wasn't working properly for me. But then once I did, at that point, it was able to run just fine. And those are fixes and documentation that you can just run and find through Google searches, like look up your issue, see what the community has to say, and you can find your resolutions on there. It's really awesome. Thankfully, the Steam Deck community is so passionate about this device, and there's so many of them out in the wild that's why I said it has some great official backing. But then you also have the community that is issuing fixes, recommendations like this, making photos, writing up documentation, and so much more on here. It's great. And that is something that is going to be, from what I've observed, sorely missed if you're going to be using any other type of handheld computer. There is going to be communities there, but it's not going to be nearly as big or robust as what we see with the Steam Deck, simply because you have Valve behind it, you have Steam behind it, and it's a pretty good device at $400 for those specs there. Yes, I do know the 256 gig and 512 gig models are more expensive, but what I mean by that is, aside from, the screen here, like the front part of the screen, and aside from the internal storage, all the rest of the specs are going to be the same, from the 64 gig to the 512 gigabyte version. Now, I also had to do a little bit of tinkering as well too, and even though playing official PC games is fun on this, I did also want to mess around with EmuDeck and the emulators on here. So if you're wanting to mess around with emulators, I would say EmuDeck is the best thing that you can get on here. At least at the time I'm recording this, I don't believe there's a Flatpak available for it, so you do have to go to the website, you have to download and install it as per their instructions. But then once everything is set up on there, once you're in desktop mode and you have to do everything through that, you're then able to install it. And from what I see, I guess it's a set of scripts that will go in, download everything to your specification, what you want, set up all the emulators, set up all the folders properly, and then of course any files that those emulators rely on that cannot be redistributed with them legally, you'd have to obtain. So for example, BIOS for the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, firmware for Switch emulation, and of course games. You have to bring your own games on there. But I have been having, personally, so much fun with PS1 and PS2 emulation. I haven't messed with any other emulation all too much. That's kind of, I guess, my favorite area to really mess around with. So for example, I really haven't messed around with the Xbox emulation. I haven't messed around with, I've done a little bit of Genesis and Super Nintendo, but it's mostly I've been playing PS1 and PS2 games on here, and it's been phenomenal. Silent Hill 2 plays wonderfully on this. Of course, most PS1 games through DuckStation, that's the emulator I choose, seems to work incredibly well. Now there has been a few issues, one of them being every game that I've run through DuckStation for PS1 has seemed to work just fine, except for one game called Loaded, which is ironically the one game that I've actually finished on here for the PS1. That's one of those games. Oh, PSP, I was messing around with that too. Great. But when it comes to Loaded, that's where you have to use the D-pad on here, and oh, that hurt. So that's why the D-pad physically hurts on this, but the game was still fun. The issues that I was running into seemed to be when I was doing like widescreen hacks, it just doesn't render things on the side properly, which that's my own choice, my own doing on there. I get that. That's probably my own problem. However, the other issue I was running into was FMVs were not playing properly on there either, and that seemed to be the only game I was running into. I don't think there's really a big issue with the emulator. I think it's probably just the compatibility for that specific game might not be the best, and I just picked a weird outlier because every other game seems to run pretty much perfectly fine and pretty nice through DuckStation. So that's been an emulator I've been wanting to mess around with for a while, and I was happy I was able to do that. The other issue I ran into, which is if you set up EmuDeck and you go in and update everything, I will recommend use EmuDeck to update the emulators. Don't update the emulators individually. I was doing that for a bit, but at one point, my setup actually ended up breaking. One of my friends was trying out my Steam Deck. He went to launch a PS1 game. Turns out my BIOS was no longer there. So I had to put the BIOS back in there. Then he tried to play the game again. It wasn't working. Like, it wouldn't load up through here, through the EmuDeck setup and all that. So then I went to update it individually. Still was having the same issue. It was then I ended up using the script and I guess the shortcut that EmuDeck puts on your desktop to actually update the whole EmuDeck suite and all the emulators that you put on there, because it does a lot of configuration that just you don't need to do manually. And at that point, once I had everything set up, once I had my ducks in a row, I guess you can say, DuckStation was able to work again. So that's my other recommendation, just if you want to avoid some headache. If you are setting up your emulators through EmuDeck, which I believe you should, also update them through EmuDeck. And keep EmuDeck also up to speed and updated through the desktop shortcuts that it makes on there. That's also to say, when it comes to recommendations for the Steam Deck, if I recommend it, if I recommend you get it, it really depends on what type of user you're going to be. I've seen a lot of people who are big PC gamers, and they say, well, I can play on my desktop every game at 4K, 120 hertz, 144 hertz at maximum settings. I don't want to play on a small screen at just over under 1080p and struggling to play my same games at 60 frames per second, or even mini games not even working on there unless you have to do some other trickery or even go into a whole nother operating system if they're just not supported at all through Linux in any way. That's when, you could set up Windows and play different games and have other launchers through a Windows installation. By the way, even though I have Windows on here, I don't play any games on it at all. I've decided I want to have SteamOS strictly for games, and I want to have Windows strictly for everything else but games. I guess to that, I'm not going to try and convince you if you don't see any value for yourself on there, because you're going to be the person who you can decide on the value for this. For me, I saw this as something fun to mess around with, tinker with, and a useful device in my arsenal of weird devices that I have all around my house. If you don't see the value in that, that is totally fine. Or if you want a portable experience, but you'd rather spend that money on a laptop and get some better capabilities from it, that's fine as well too. I don't gatekeep games or platforms or anything at this point. It's one of those things, I don't really want to spend the energy doing that. I don't really want to get into all these different battles of platforms and games and such, and I think a lot of that energy would probably just be spent better playing the games, and that is the best thing you can do. Really, if you are happy with your own setup, playing your games in your own specific way, whether that is a full desktop, a laptop, a Steam Deck, another handheld PC, or even a console, that is totally fine and up to you. But for me, for my own uses, for me understanding the limitations that the Steam Deck has, and even using it as a bit of an experimental and tinkering type device, it's been pretty good. But speaking of tinkering, that's another thing. For anybody who is wanting to dip their toes into the world of PC gaming, and you might be more console centric, or you're just the person where you want to set everything up, you want it to work, you're not really going to get that. For the most part, there's going to be some level of troubleshooting, some form of tinkering that you're going to need to do, and that's just part of the beast of PC gaming. I'm not saying that as a negative, I'm just saying that is a part of the experience that you will come to either live with or maybe even love at that point. Some people hate it, they want nothing to do with it, and I totally get that. But like I said, when I was playing Prototype on here, I had to go into desktop mode, I had to download another version of Proton, I had to set that up on here, I had to research, I had to troubleshoot. For some people, that sounds like a nightmare. For me, that was just a fun experience. Even if you stay all within SteamOS and you keep everything like above board, you never want to get into the desktop side of things, you're going to be messing with things such as the controller schemes on here. Maybe the controller schemes that are available through the community through SteamOS on here aren't to your liking. Maybe you want to make your own. There's going to be tinkering that you're going to be doing in regards to this here. And especially if you want to mess with some of the awesome emulation on here, yeah, you are going to need a bit more technical know-how. I'm not saying it's anything difficult or impossible, but having strong Google skills is really great in that regard. And if you feel like your Google skills are weak, well, this is a good playground to really hone those skills in and really buff them up. So that's a part of it as well too. All in all, I've personally been extremely happy with the Steam Deck. I've had a lot of fun messing around with this device. I've had a lot of fun using it. Maybe the only thing that I really want to mess around more with is, of course, delve more into the emulation side of things. Probably make some videos of some kind in this as well too, past this video, some tutorials and such. But also, I haven't really had much of an opportunity to really get into the offline mode on here. And by that I mean Steam has historically not had the best offline support on here, where it's like you put your computer into offline mode and your games that are installed should theoretically work, and randomly they just stop working. I have had the opportunity here a few times, like when I was traveling a little bit, but even when I was on a plane traveling, I actually didn't get out my Steam Deck. I pulled out my Switch and I was playing that Kirby game where your goal is to just get as fat as possible. That's just what I felt like playing. That's what I felt like playing at that point. Either way, at the end of the day, that's kind of what I want to share. For the most part, I have really positive experiences and things to say about this, but for anybody who might be on the fence, you're thinking of getting one, you're looking for other opinions on here, I will just say, remember, this is still a computer, and when it comes to playing games and messing around with a computer, there is going to be good and bad sides to it, so just make sure you're still going to have that. It's not going to be as completely, just holding your hand and just pick something and run it and you never run into issues as like consoles back there. So for anybody who's expecting a fully consoleized experience, you'll kind of get it, sure, but you're still going to have to mess with this and treat it like a computer, because that's what it is. But it's a really cool handheld PC, and I have very much enjoyed it. Anyways, that's about it for this video here. I guess it went on a little longer than I was expecting, but I did want to talk about the Steam Deck, my experiences with it. If you have a Steam Deck and you've had experiences with it, positive or negative, please share them down below in the comments. I would love to have some discussions in regards to that, see what other people's opinions are in regards to the Steam Deck itself. If you're thinking of getting one, or maybe you just don't want one at all, you don't see the point of it, go ahead and share that as well too. Just be polite about it, that's all I ask. Anyways, that's about it for this video here. This is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, a like would absolutely be appreciated, and if you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too.